Hey guys, welcome to this quick breakdown video of my Owl House fan animation. In this video, I'm going to briefly talk about some of the decisions I made behind the scenes. Up to this point in time, I had essentially done no lip sync practice. I ended up getting the storyboards by Ango Mango recommended to me on YouTube, and considering I'm a fan of the Owl House, I decided that this would be a good opportunity to practice lip sync animation. Additionally, doing this animation based off an existing TV show would allow me to have existing content to compare to, and in a way it would be like learning to animate for an actual production. Overall, I was hoping to create something that looked as if it came out from the actual show. Finally, taking up this project also gave me the opportunity to practice cleanup. My animated short Gato wasn't great for cleanup practice since its style is based on a storybook. In other words, the line work was much more loose and messy, so this project was an opportunity to practice a more traditional cleanup. First, I'll answer the question that most of you are probably asking. Why didn't you animate the whole scene portrayed in the storyboards? Well, let me start by giving you some context. I only work on personal animated projects on weekends because I'm also a full-time student. This means I only get so much time to work on these projects every week. I want to get to work on different projects and practice different things throughout the year. Animating this full scene would have taken too much time and would have prevented me from working on other things like practicing animating in different styles. Taking this into account, I chose to cut out or change parts of the sequence which I felt weren't necessary. One example of a change I made was to have Amity's opening dialogue happen while she was pacing rather than showing it in a waist shot like it was originally depicted in the storyboards. Amity is, in my opinion, the most inconsistently drawn character in the Owl House. Her proportions and facial features felt like they were always changing, thus I picked my favorite version from the show and tried to stay on model throughout my animation. I went with the softer jaw and slightly more realistic proportions. The only thing I didn't study super closely was the exact mouth shapes from the show. There are so many and it would have taken ages to find them all. I also felt like I could still successfully achieve a short that looked like it was from the show without using the exact mouth shapes. And those are pretty much the only major changes I knowingly made to the source material. Now let's talk about some of the minor stuff in a quick lightning round. 1. I decided to include the angry tomato blushing. Most of the time when she's angry there's no blushing, but they've made jokes about it several times and I also think it's funny, so I wanted to include it. 2. There are no shadows on the ground because there are often no shadows in the show. 3. For sound design, I tried to replicate the show to the best of my ability. There are very faint ambient sounds that you've seen. There were also sounds like footsteps, but never really sounds of clothing rubbing against each other or anything like that, hence why those sound effects were omitted. In terms of determining how to do the animation itself, I looked at the scenes with smoother animation in the Owl House, most notably the Luz and Amity kiss. I tried to replicate it as best I could while remaining on 2s. The only exception to this rule was when I was animating big movements, like a walk cycle, which was animated on 3s. In Amity's case, you might notice that I strayed slightly from the storyboards in some cases. One example is this pose. In the show, Amity is very fidgety in these awkward situations. I felt she was holding her hands on her hip for too long on the boards. I felt she needed to be more fidgety, so I changed the pose slightly so her body language was constantly changing. She starts in a more open and slightly more confident looking pose, then proceeds to falter for a moment into a more closed and awkward pose. Another example would have been when I switched from the wide angle to the close-up of Amity. I didn't think it made sense to have her point at herself when she said, "Now look at me." When she says this, she's referring to how sweaty she is. To me, it made more sense to have her say this when she raises her arms instead of having her point at herself first and then cutting to the close-up as depicted in the boards. I think these were good changes, but maybe you disagree and you can let me know in the comments. All the backgrounds are essentially photo bash elements taken from the show. While I think background practice is invaluable, it wasn't one of the main things I wanted to practice during this project. Thus, most of my time and attention was directed towards the stuff I actually wanted to practice, that being the lip sync animation and animation in general, as well as the cleanup. As you just saw, the last thing I want to talk about in this video is what went well, what went wrong, what I can improve, and how I can improve. I feel that this is important as it is a reminder for myself in the future of what I need to do differently and what I did well. I also believe that anyone can learn from anyone. You might be able to learn something from my successes and failures. You might also see something that you believe I'm doing wrong, and you might be able to give me some pointers. In other words, I'm always trying to learn and improve, and I believe that collaboration is absolutely crucial for growth. Overall, I think it was quite a successful project. My biggest complaints have to do with some of the hair physics. I think for the most part they're pretty great, but I do think there are some things that could have been improved. For example, when Amity was spitting, I struggled to achieve good-looking hair physics. I think this is partially due to the two-dimensional nature in which Amity's hair is drawn. When somebody spins, their hair should move up and out due to a centripetal force, but transitioning this three-dimensional hair shape to this more simplistic 2D shape was difficult for me. With more time, I believe I could have refined this transition. Next, I wanted to talk about the walk cycle in a circle. This is a technically challenging shot to animate, and I'm honestly very pleased with the result. That being said, I don't think it's perfect, and with more time, I definitely think it could have been better. I personally feel that the transition out of the walk cycle back to the standing pose is probably my weakest bit of animation in the whole project. With that said, you may have noticed that in both cases, time was a common pitfall during this project. While I could have worked on this project for an indefinite amount of time, I believe that it was important to set a deadline. Otherwise, I'd keep working on this thing forever. That being said, my lack of time is not a result of the deadline. I feel like I wasted a lot of time during the rough animation process because I kept trying to draw finished frames right away. I was essentially trying to combine the rough and tie-down phase of animation. This wasted so much time and in the end meant I had less time to work on the final cleanup. In the future, I need to remind myself to treat the rough animation phase like the rough animation phase. That means figuring out my movement arcs, timing, and spacing, and making sure the animation looks believable. The small details are not important during this phase and can be added more easily during the tie-downs. That being said, I also learned that I absolutely love doing cleanup. I think it is genuinely my favorite part of the animation process. I love getting to see the final clean animation appearing before my eyes. I just find it incredibly satisfying, and I find the process quite relaxing. And that is officially everything I wanted to discuss in this video. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. If you have any suggestions or any questions, feel free to comment down below. And finally, make sure to check out the original storyboards by Ango Mango. Thank you everybody for watching.